Hello, welcome to the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, we're going to mix a Roland TR909 drum beat in the MPC. It's one of the basic fundaments of house music, but of course it's been used in multiple genres. And I just want to show you some of the tips and tricks that I use when mixing. Let's jump in. Okay, so I've got a 909 beat that I've programmed in the MPC. I've used pretty much every sound on the 909. I probably wouldn't normally do this. I might just use the kick, or I might just use the hats, claps, etc. I've used them multiple times. I've lost count, to be honest, and I've lost count of how many times I've mixed a 909. One thing I do want to say is that if you see a video, content creator, etc., with a video that says how to mix the perfect 909 kick or how to mix the 909 in a perfect way, etc., just be a little bit suspicious. That there's no right or wrong, but in my opinion, my own personal opinion, there is no perfect way to mix a 909. It's so versatile and can be mixed in so many different ways. Like, for instance, that I'm going to go through this mix now. If I did this tomorrow, it would probably sound slightly different. What I've done over the years, many years of mixing 909s, is I've learnt certain tricks, which I'm going to tell you today, and you can apply those. But also, I still experiment with the 909. I mean, the kick, for instance, it's just limitless what you can do with it on the actual hardware and in the emulations, but also in the MPC with just a simple 909 kick sample. You can play with the sustain, you can play with the attack, you know, I'm going to show you, but just like I said, just be wary of anybody that says this is the perfect way to mix a 909. Be wary of any content creator or anybody that tells you there's a perfect way to mix anything, because mixing is such a subjective thing. You know, just always keep that in mind, and just be really, really careful when you watch a video and you hear a particular drum sound and you like the way that it sounds. You can't apply that compression and that EQ and that technique to every single kick drum, and it's going to sound the same, because it's just not. And that's exactly the same with a 909. As I said, I literally, if I mix this in a couple of hours, it would probably sound different. It would sound similar, but it would be different. And that's what I love about it, you know, and that's what I love about mixing in general is there's rules and tips and tricks that you can follow, and you can be objective, but there's also a massive element of subjectivity that plays its part in every single mix that you do and every single track that you produce. So I just wanted to say, just be a little bit wary, because I have seen a couple on my research for this. There were a couple of videos saying this is the perfect way to mix a 909, and I you know, I'm not knocking them. If they think that's the perfect way to mix it, then that's cool. But I think they're missing out on so much by just mixing it in that one particular way, because there's so many different ways. So I'm rambling now. Oh yeah, just before we go any further, for those that are interested in the lens, today I'm using a 20mm Canon Cine lens from 1978. It's a beautiful lens, but because I'm shooting on a Super 35 sensor, it's actually 30mm. But it is just such a lovely lens, and I love it. Really creamy, really nice. Anyway, that's for those people that are interested in that. So let's have a listen to the beat. Fairly standard house beat, kind of old school sounding. That's very kind of early 90s sound. A little bit of a Todd Terry touch in there, a little bit of Def Mix sound in there as well. But I've used every element, as I've said. I've used a kick, the hats, the clap, there's a snare in there, there's a crash cymbal in there which is muted, there's a ride in there that's muted, and the toms are in there as well, and there's even a rim actually. So let's just unmute the crash and the ride as well. I just honestly, I love the 909 so much. I could listen to it all day. I actually released an EP in the mid 90s of it bombed. I barely sold 100 copies. We pressed up 500 copies and went out on a Friday in London, round the vans selling them. It was a 5-track EP of just 909 drum beats. It would probably sell quite well now, but in the mid-90s, it was a little bit left field. People were not really buying things like that then. They were using, for things like that, you went to Future Music or whatever, and you would have these CDs that everyone was using. But anyway, I did a 5-track EP just with 909 drum beats on it. And I thought, yeah, I've broken the mold. This is going to be brilliant. Loads of people are going to buy this, and they didn't. It bombed. I don't actually have a copy of it, unfortunately, and I've not ever seen a copy on Discogs. But there are 500 or so copies out there somewhere. Probably 400 sitting in a cupboard in a distributor's factory somewhere. Anyway, rambling again. So let's go back to the start. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and go through this in order, but the way my brain works is a little bit all over the place, but I'll try and go through it in order. As always, if you watch my videos, you'll know that I mix top down. And so therefore I start with the main mix bus, which is somewhere. There we go. Output 1 and 2. I then go to the submixes, and I've split that into 3 different submixes. The kick is on one submix. The Low Perc, which is snares, claps, and toms and rim, are on sub 2, and sub 3 is hi-hats, crash cymbals, rides. And you know, as you can see on submix 2, there isn't actually anything going on there. Haven't actually done anything on there at all. And then I'll go to the individual sounds. That's just the way that I've mixed drums for a long time. You know, bus 1 kicks, bus 2 low perc, bus 3 high perc, bus 4 percussion, bus 5 bass, etc., guitars, synths, vocals, and so on and so forth. And if you watch my videos, you'll know that. So submix 1, yeah, like I said, kick. So let's just go back to the start again. And what we'll actually know, what we need to do is we need to look at what is going on output 1 and 2, and then we'll work our way down. So I've got a fairly normal mix bus going on here. Again, if you've watched my videos, you'll know that I tend to mix like this, starting with compressor, going into EQ, bit of tube drive, and then the air limiter. So if you see from the start, so bear in mind that this is just a drum beat, but I'm treating it the same way I would treat an entire track. So this is my main bit mix bus out, my master out, if you want to call it that. Fairly standard mix bus setup here, kind of like an SSL G bus compressor, 2:1 ratio. Could go a little bit further sometimes. Sometimes I could go down to 1:5. Sometimes I could go up to 4:1. Long attack to let all the transients through, because I don't really want to crush things. This is about gluing. This is why Ableton, for instance, has the glue compressor. I think that's what it's called, by Cytomic the glue, and that's based on an SSL G bus compressor. So it's about gluing everything. It's just about giving everything a little bit of cohesion. And I'm not doing barely any gain reduction, maybe 1 decibel, 2 decibels max. Short release, so it gives it a little bit of punch. It just isn't really doing very much. It's just gluing. And I've actually even brought the mix back a little bit. So I've probably overcompressed a tiny little amount, and then I just dialed back the mix. Yeah, you can see it's barely tickling. Into power EQ. We've got a low shelf at 80 Hertz. That could go a bit lower sometimes maybe, but for this I wanted it at 80 Hertz because it's quite a long sustain on the kick, and I'll explain that later on. And that can sometimes it depends on how you've tuned the kick, but the fundamental, I tend to have my kicks in C for some reason, especially on a 909. I don't know why. I don't tend to be one of those people that tunes kicks, but there's no right or wrong here. You can tune your kick, and something like a 909 and 808, obviously it's really, really easy to do that. But the fundamental is around about 60 Hertz on the kick drum I've got on here, but it's got quite a long sustain. So I don't want it to be too boomy. So I didn't want to drop the low shelf and push it too far. So I've got it at 80 Hertz. And I might have even rolled off some low end. No, I haven't actually. But I've boosted the kick later on, and I'll explain that. Now it is actually a shelf, so in theory it is actually boosting anything below 80. But let's crack on here. Yeah, so a small amount here, little bit of mud rolled off. This is, again, remember this is broad stroke because this is a mix bus. A little bit of clarity at 5K. I love 5K. It's a mastering engineer thing. And then an 8K shelf boosted that quite a lot because I want the 909s, you know, sometimes you don't want it like this, but in this particular one I wanted it nice and crispy, early 90s house, nice and clean. Think Frankie Knuckles' Def Mix, maybe not so much Todd Terry because he tended to use an SP1200, so it's quite gritty, there was a bit of roll off from the high ends. So I'm going for more your kind of early 90s K-class Def Mix, you know, yeah, Dave Morales, those kind of people. They tended to have their drums nice and clean. They probably were straight off a 909 rather than sampled. Although saying that, actually, I think Frankie Knuckles did actually sample, but I think he used a Akai rather than an SP1200. But I could be wrong. So if you know anything different, please comment below. But I love that. I love that early 90s Def Mix sound. So yeah, quite bright. And then into one of my favorite plugins on the MPC. Again, just a little bit of drive, a little bit of saturation. Concentrate on the hats and the snares and listen to how crispier, but a little bit of grit in there as well. It makes it bloom as well, which I love. And then finally, a limiter, not really doing anything. It's literally there to catch peaks. It's not actually doing anything at all because I'm hitting at about -4 dB, I think. So I don't really want it to be doing anything. It's literally there as a safety net. So that's what's happening on the main out. And the reason, if you do watch my videos a lot, you'll know that I mix top down. And the reason why I do a lot of work, if you do a good bit of work on the mix bus, you've got less work to do further down the line, and therefore you're taking up less plug-in slots, you're using less processing power. Submix 1 is kicks. And if we just go to the kick and solo it, you'll see there's actually no work at all on the actual kick itself. But if you go into Submix 1 and go into channel strip, go into the EQ, you can see the fundamental was around about 60 Hertz. It must have been a little bit higher, or I felt nice going a little bit higher, so I've gone to 67 Hertz and I've given that quite a boost. And then I've rolled off the highs because with a 909 kick, you can have a real click to it if you want, but you can also have it sounding thick and thuddy. You can have it really short. You can take the sustain off of a transient shaper. Obviously, you can change it on the 909 as well. And with the kick on the, there we go. With the kick on the 909, you can hear the sustain. I could actually have that a lot shorter, but as I was explaining earlier on, I love sustain on the 909 kick. So what you've got to be careful with is the boom afterwards, because if you've got too much low end on a kick, especially round about the fundamental at 60 Hertz, there's going to be so much boom in it that it's just going to take up the whole mix, and you're going to have problems with compression in the whole mix. The mastering engineer is going to absolutely hate your guts, and it's just going to cause a lot of issues. So just be wary of that. A lot of house music producers, I know Disclosure really agree with this, and Skrillex, I think I might have seen him mention it as well, and possibly definitely some other producers. They like having their kick drums off the 909 really, really short, and then you eliminate that boom. But if you know how to control it using compression and EQ, you can still have that sustain. I just think it's a really nice early 90s kind of house sound. So I do actually like to have a little bit of sustain. I don't like it to be too abrupt. Disclosure, I've said they do some really, really good videos on breakdowns and their mixes, by the way. If you produce any music, mix any music, watch their videos, because two really, really great guys. Not a massive fan of their music, but actually that's a little bit cruel. I do like their music. It's just that they kind of let's not go into it, but they do really, really good breakdowns, and they they do a lot of explanations on their mixes and stuff. And one thing I know that they do sometimes is split the kick drums. I actually do this as well, and EQ the high end of the kick drum and the sustain on one channel, and then they have the low end with everything rolled off on another channel. So then you can EQ. You can, in effect, you're doing kind of multi-band EQ and multi-band compression. So that's a little trick that you can do. I haven't done that here. I like the nice bare bones kick drum. Oh man, I love that so much. Maybe I should make an EP of just, it'd probably sell. Nowadays, it'd probably sell. Everyone would go, oh, it's crazy. It's so left field. You should do the Boiler Room. Anyway, moving on. Ooh, a little dig there. Okay, so let's move on to the hats. That's a classic Todd Terry style bit of programming there with the hat. So what I've got, the way I've got the hat set up, and this is how it is on the 909. The closed hat will choke the open hat. So on an MPC, obviously you have to set that up, and I've set that up in Program Edit with the mute group. The hats are both on mute group 1, so they will choke, and that's how you get that. A technique which I've showed in a previous video as well is having the closed hat after the open hat, but turned right down. Daft Punk use this technique quite a lot, and you can get some nice, you can sort of change the swing almost of the sustain of the open hat on the 909. These are just all little tricks that you can use. I mean, as you can see here as well, I've got the level of the closed hat turned down quite a lot as well, because I want it to be a feel, but I don't want it to be too in your face. And with it turned down in the mix, the closed hat, it creates a little bit of a breathing, pumping kind of thing, because it's going. See what I mean? It kind of makes the hi-hat breathe. Not actually doing anything on the individual pads, as you can see, or on the actual track, I should say now, with MPC 3, but on Submix 3, which is where I've got my High Perc sent to, I'm doing some general EQ, brightening up quite a lot, 6 kilohertz shelf, so quite a low high shelf, almost going into the low mids. Bit of clarity again. I kind of felt the attack of the hat needed a little bit of a bite on it, and obviously I've rolled off a lot of the low end. Now be careful when you're rolling off low end on 909s, because there's a nice bit of body in an open hi-hat on a 909, round about kind of between 200 to 400 hertz, and if you roll it too high, you lose that body, and it can sound a little bit brittle. So I don't tend to roll off with a high pass filter. I don't tend to roll off any more than about 200 hertz, because you start losing that kind of nice body that you get on a 909 hat. Tiny amount of compression on there, a little bit higher, more into kind of drum compression area. Anything from sort of 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1 is nice for drums. Classic kind of DBX 160 sound. That's a compressor. So I've done a little bit of compression on it. I've not touched the attack, as you can see. It's quite long, so I'm letting the transient through the hat through, and I've got a short release. So it's given a little bit of snap to the hats, and it's clamping down. The release is very, very short, so it gives it a little bit of pump. But what it's doing is it's making the hat breathe a little bit as well. Be wary of that. It can be a little bit too breathy depending on the tempo of your song. But, you know, I just know from experience and using this particular compressor in the MPC that that's a nice kind of level to have it at, if you on drums especially. These kind of settings are nice. Don't copy them exactly. It's going to change for whatever your hats and your snares and your claps and etc. are. So more maybe play with a ratio, which will, you know, kind of in effect govern how much compression is going to happen. So That sounds nice to me. I think I started on 3.1 and I dialed it back a little bit because it's a little bit too strong. The gate is on there, but it's not actually doing anything. Yeah, like I said, a little bit of EQ, but mostly it's brightening up really. Quite subtle, but it's brightening up the highs, the low, and the high mids. Sorry, not low mids. I think I said low mids earlier on. I meant high mids. And just with that little bit of punch, just added that little bit of snap added with the compression. So I'll just play a before and after again now. Also listen to, you can hear where I've rolled off the lows on the hat, because 909 hi-hats do go quite low. If you look at them if you look at them visually, analyze them, you can see there's actually a little bit of low end in the source. So you do need to roll off a little bit, but like I said, don't roll off too much. Or at least be wary. I mean, you can roll off as much as you like. Like I said, there's no right or wrong, but I like there to still be a bit of body in there. So now with the crash, I have actually done a little bit of work on it individually. So I've got that work on the Submix 3, and then I've wanted to do a little bit of extra work on the hat. And this is where you're going into individual instruments as opposed to submixes or bus mixes. So with the crash, you can see I've rolled a lot more off because I want to completely get rid of the body on that. And I've also put a ton of high on it to really make it stand out. I want it to glisten. You can hear how much brighter that is. Same with the ride as well. I've brightened that up quite a lot. Not rolled as much off on that because that's actually quite brittle in the 909 already. And I didn't want it to sound any more brittle. But the thing about rides in a 909, this is how I like to use them. And I know that there are a lot of people that use it this way as well, especially a lot of Detroit techno producers, Carl Craig, some of the really early producers, people like Wyan Atkins and stuff, is you use... Kerry Chandler uses it like this as well. You use a 909 ride cymbal as a fill, so you can almost not hear it, but it just suddenly makes your beat kind of sound fuller, and it's like a top line underneath. So you can hear, if you listen to any of the tracks that I've made over the years, I use a 909 quite often, and you don't really hear it come in. It's not like suddenly, oh wow, there's the 909 ride, but it just gives the beat a lift. That's actually the word I was looking for, a lift. It gives it a lift. So if we take that out, you see, so it just fills out the beat rather than announcing everyone I'm using ride cymbal. That probably comes from being a drummer. I started off as a drummer when I was a kid, and ride cymbals are used in that way by drummers on a live kit. You kind of use it as a filling. Jazz drummers use it a lot in that way, but also drummers will use it. They'll be playing the hi-hat in the chorus, for instance, and sorry, in the verse, for instance, they'll be playing the hi-hat kind of thing, but then when the chorus comes in, they'll switch to the ride, and that just kind of gives everything a lift. So that's how I still use it today, using it as a kind of lift. I very rarely use it as a statement cymbal. It's just literally a fill, I guess. Also, just want to say this, did you just notice earlier on, by the way, when I pressed mute to bring it out, it wasn't completely reactive. Of course, now it's absolutely fine, but it didn't come out of mute straight away. I have noticed in the new firmware 3.0, 3.02 or whatever it's on now, that the touchscreen can come a little bit sticky sometimes. And I've noticed a couple other people on some of the forums that I go into regularly, they've said the same thing. It's a little bit, especially in track mutes as well, track mutes, it can become really sticky. You can hit it, it will mute, then it won't, then it will, then it won't. Of course, now I'm doing it, it's absolutely fine. But maybe if you leave it sitting there for a while, it does it. But just, yeah, just wanted to point that out. I just noticed that then. So let's go back to the clap now. Clap on the oh, there's my clap. Actually, let's just mute the rides a second. See again. The clap is, you know, I think I probably use a 909 clap even when I'm not using a 909 drum kit in virtually every single house record I think I've ever made in some form or another, whether it be a short version. This one's got a lot of sustain on it. This is a very kind of sustainy 909 actually. I haven't chopped things, you know, I haven't shortened anything on it at all. So in Submix 2, there's no work at all. Like I said earlier on, I've done individual work on the clap and the snare, the rim and the tom. So here you can see I've rolled off a ton of the low end because again, there's quite a lot going on in the low end on the claps on the 909. So just to give it a little less, I don't want it to be conflicting with the lows and the low mids, etc. I've given it a bit of clarity at 3.4. Now here's a little lesson. You'll notice when I'm doing that in solo, you're kind of thinking to yourself, well, I was just thinking to myself, actually, do you know what? Have I made a few, that doesn't sound right, that clap now. Because listening to it in solo, it might not sound right, and that's why you got to be careful. And I'm sure you've heard a lot of people say this, giving tutorials on mixing, or at least I hope they do. Always mix in context. You go to solo. There's nothing wrong with going into solo, but don't mix solo. Don't go solo, mix your kick, solo, mix your hat, solo, mix your snare. Because if you're not mixing it in context, you're gonna get frequencies. You're not going to know where there's going to be frequencies battling against each other. But secondly, you might get the perfect clap. Oh my God, this clap sounds amazing. But then when you drop it into the mix, it doesn't sound right. And that clap right there in solo sounds a little bit brittle and a bit puny. But because I have filled it out with the snare and given the snare some body, then it sounds fuller. So just bear that in mind. There's nothing wrong with checking things, doing your surgical work when things are in solo. Like I have done here. I've added some compression. There you go. That's a typical DBX 160 style compression there. Longer attack though. A shorter attack and a longer release because I did actually want to kind of round the clap off. I didn't want to let too much of a transient go through. Hear how the clap sounds a bit rounded off. And how the release is affecting the sustain of the actual clap. I wanted the clap to be a bit more rounded. But again, listening to that in solo, this is a great example actually. It sounds, a crap clap is what we call it. Well, that's what I call it anyway, and I've called it that for years, crap clap. It's a crap clap, but in the context of the mix, because I've got the snare drum going, and moving on to the snare drum, lovely segue Conan. I've given it quite a bit of body. You can see, look, 225 hertz, 2 decibels, because the body on the snare, on this particular snare, 909, you can tune it, so the fundamental will change. I have rolled off some of the highs, but I've boosted the body to give it a little bit of oomph, and that's why I'd rolled off the lows on the clap. Still rolled some low end off on the snare, but I've given it a boost in its body. See again, in solo, the snare doesn't sound great. You'll find the same in the rim as well. But because they're in context and I'm mixing them as a whole rather than each individual single instrument. With house music a lot, you're mixing claps and snares. Actually in hip hop as well, you're mixing claps and snares layered over the top of each other. So bear that in mind. You want them to gel together, which is quite often why I put them on the same bus, because I want them to gel together. I want them to sound that they're in the same place, that they're in the same room. Okay, so moving on to the toms. Again, you know, I've only used a low tom there. I think that's a low tom. It might be a mid tom tuned down. Unmistakable, you know, the toms off a 909. Again, I use toms off 909s quite a lot. Sometimes to lay underneath a kick. Sometimes I use them in the way that I've used it here. That's a classic house music bit of programming, that actually. It's quite early Detroit techno. And obviously in techno, you know, people like Carl Craig, Underground Resistance, I mean, they use 909s all the time, and 909 toms especially, they use it all the time. So with the tom, I've boosted again the body, not too low because I don't want it to mess around with the kick. And obviously there's quite a lot of sustain, do, do. And if you combine that with the kicks, do, then, so the way I describe things, you're going to have some issues. Another thing you get with toms quite often, between 600 and 800 hertz, sometimes you get a little bit of a, it's not resonance, but you get like a little bit of a boxy sound. Boxy sounds quite often of 200 to 400, but with toms, depending on what tom it is and depending on how it's tuned, you're going to need to sweep around. That's why, again, going back to what I said earlier on about people saying this is the perfect tom, this is the perfect way to mix a tom in the 909, this is the perfect way to mix a kick. There is no perfect way, because the way you can tune, sample, saturate, EQ, compress, etc. a 909, multiple ways, millions, infinite ways. How can there possibly be one single perfect way of doing it? There isn't. So sweeping frequencies, quite often you're going to have to do with things like this. So with this particular tom, the way it's tuned, I've given it some body, I've rolled off the low end, I've taken out some of the boxiness at 600 hertz, and it doesn't need any work up higher because I don't really want any of the high mids on it. Again, little bit of compression. I've rolled off a shorter attack, so I am in effect rolling off the transient, the attack of the tom-tom, 3 to 9, 391. So again, it's kind of in DVX 160 territory, and some of the compressors on the SSL desks, the E channel, for instance, you can kind of get a nice rounded with a fast attack. I haven't quite gone that far. It's not a fast attack, but it's not a slow attack either. So I am actually in effect affecting the transient, the initial attack of the tom-tom, because I want it to sound smooth. I don't want it to cut through the mix. So the best way to describe it would rather than the tom-tom going doom, starting with a D, I've made the tom-tom start with a B, boom, rounded it off. That's the best way I can think to describe it. Not a D, it's a B. So we'll call it a B tom, not a D tom. All these amazing tips I'm giving here. Right, so we're going to go back in a minute over something that I've added to, I think it's the clap and the rim, possibly the snare. So you can hear, especially on the rim, I've sent quite a lot to my send one, which is always reverb. I love the sound of reverb on a rim shot. I'll show you how I've set the reverb up in a second. But with the rim, I think there's a little bit of work on it. Yeah, you can see with the compression, there is quite a bit of compression there. Again, it's a DVX 160 style compression, but this time the attack's longer because I don't want to round off I want it snappy. So short release, long attack, letting through the transient of the rim. So it knocks more. It's subtle. That's without. and that's with. And you can hear in the EQ as well. You know, I can hear it just with my ears that I've pushed around about 1000 hertz. I would have guessed, but it's actually 1.16. Pushed that quite far, and also again body. The body on low percussion in the kind of 200 to 300 hertz region. So I rolled off the low end, so it's not it's not battling with the kick drum or any of the bass that I might have on some synths later on, etc. But I want some body. So I've boosted that quite a lot on the rim. Because again, the rim on the 909 can be a little bit brittle without EQ. Here's something. I quite often see this. People will they'll buy a 909, they'll plug it into the desk, and then they'll play it straight into the desk with no EQ, no compression, and they'll go, oh, well, I thought the 909 was supposed to sound amazing. This sounds rubbish. And I've seen so many people sell 909s saying this isn't what it's cracked up to be. And what it is that they haven't realized that, you know, you obviously have to add EQ, and you do have to do quite a lot of EQ with a 909 and compression and saturation, etc., to get the best out of it. Because just the raw sounds, whilst I love them, they can just be a bit mediocre. So you can see I've done quite a lot of work here. I love the air channel strip because it's like an SSL desk. You can actually push it quite far and do some real sound design with your EQ. So, you know, I mean, something like a Neve desk or an API desk, I don't think I've ever pushed anything to 4.2 because it would just break up and it would really affect the sound. But with the SSL style desk, which I think is what the air channel strip is based on, the EQ curves, I think, it could be a Neve, I could be completely wrong, but you can push it quite far. I've had 8 decibels of high shelf put on a hi-hat before on here, and it doesn't break it up. It doesn't sound, it sounds good like an SSL E channel and a G channel does. Anyway, after all that really long explanation, the rim actually only happens once. Long explanation on the rim. Anyway, so that's it. We've covered that. So yeah, going to the, let's go to the return one, which is my reverb. So the way I've got that set up is it's a room reverb. It's a small studio. I've used the preset here, but I've added a little bit of a pre-delay. Around about 120 beats per minute to 125, maybe even up to 130, maybe not that far. 9, 10, 11 milliseconds of pre-delay sounds really, really nice on a reverb because you've got a little bit of a gap. It's tiny, but it does create something nice with, it's a real 80s sound, you know, a Lexicon 224 or 480L, and some of the earlier digital Yamaha SPX, I think maybe. You have this really small pre-delay on your reverb, and it just sounds so nice on 909 rims and claps, because you get this little bit of a gap, because what you are in effect doing is emulating a clap or a rim shot or whatever. You've hit it, it's traveled a little distance, and it's bounced back off the wall, and that's what your pre-delay is, and it sounds really, really nice. I have to say that I actually got this tip off one of my favourite house mixers, a guy called Dave Darlington, Grammy winning, I'm sure he's been nominated more than once for a Grammy for mixing. Fantastic guy, works at Bass Hit in New York, or is it New Jersey? He's in America somewhere, on the East Coast, and great guy, amazing mixer. You can learn so much from him. There are some videos online of work that he's done, mixed a lot of Masters at Work stuff, and a ton of other massive house producers. But yeah, that said, amazing guy, really knowledgeable on mixing, and I picked up that tip from him, the little pre-delay on your reverbs on a 909 kit or house music kits, and it just kind of introduces almost a little bit of swing as well. So that's a nice little trick there, but play with it. Don't just go 9 milliseconds. That's what Dave Darlington said, or that's what Conan said. I'm going to go 9 milliseconds. Experiment with it a little bit, and also experiment with the length of the reverb as well. So just demonstrating that quickly, you can hear there's a little bit of reverb. It's really slight. I mean, I barely sent anything to the effect, but you'll hear the reverb, but there is a tiny little gap. I mean, it's almost, I mean, you could argue that you wouldn't actually even be able to hear 9 milliseconds, but there's still a gap. There's still something there. It almost sounds like it's going ba-da, ba-da. So experiment with that, because with reverbs, I don't tend to do it with delays as much, because with a delay, you're going to be setting the time of the delay to come back. But with reverbs, a really nice tip on drums in house music especially. I've not really done it in hip-hop. Don't really tend to use reverb very much in hip-hop, actually, when I mix for clients. It's not a thing. But with house music, reverb, also bear in mind as well that you're giving the whole sound a spread as well, because reverb is going to be giving it width. You can hear the reverb on the sides, and with that little bit of pre-delay as well. Now, just quickly, finally, kick front and center. You don't have to follow the rules, but I would suggest that you have the kick front and center. And hats, you can play around with those. You can add some reverb. You can add the Hass effect to give them some width, but I haven't here. But what I've done is with the crash and the ride, the tom and the rim, I've just panned them slightly, and you'll be able to hear it in the mix, and it just gives everything a little bit of width. There's no rules to this. It's just something I like to do. I like to think of my drums sometimes as an actual drummer, and obviously with a drum kit, you've got hi-hat on your left if you're right-handed, snare in the middle, kick in the middle, but your toms go across, your cymbals go across. So, you know, sometimes think like that and use panning, use the way that you set up a stereo field like that. Don't, you know, stress too much about it, because in house music and a lot of big club systems, they're almost going to be in mono. So if you start hard panning your cymbals or hard panning your toms, you're probably going to lose them when you play it on a system in a big nightclub. So don't go too mad on it. But it's nice just to give a little bit of a, you know, I've plus 10 here. In Studio One, it can go to maybe plus 25 either side. But the MPC, I find plus 25 is too much. But experiment. But it's just something to experiment with. And like I said, I've just done that here. So there you have it, the Roland TR909. I mean, it must have been used on 1 million records, at least. I absolutely love it. I still love the sound so much. I love that it's so flexible. You can get so many different vibes and sounds out of it. Distort it. You can use it in hip hop. You can use it in house. You can use it in pop. You can use it in anything. It's just so versatile. I did used to own a Roland 909, and I do miss it. It's one of the pieces of hardware that I do actually miss. But the thing is there's so many sample packs out there now with decent 909s on there. There's good plugins. Roland do a great emulation of it, obviously, which I do tend to use. D16 do another really good emulation of it. There's multiple emulations of it, and you know, it's just one of those sounds, one of those drum machines which is so instantly recognizable. However, you can mix it, compress it, EQ it, etc. in such a way, distort it, saturate it in such a way that it does become, you can get it to the point where you don't recognize it anymore. And that's why I love the versatility of it. So thanks for watching. This is the Quakes Motel. My name's Conan. Till next time.